Here, Mom packed extra today.
Aaliyah Carter knelt down on the sidewalk outside the Meridian Financial Building, unzipped her backpack, and pulled out half of her turkey sandwich, wrapped tight in a paper napkin folded like a little roof. "Here," she said. "Mom packed extra today." Mom had not packed extra. Mom never packed extra. There was never extra in the Carter house. But Aaliyah had learned a long time ago that if she said it that way, the old man on the bench would actually take the food instead of pushing it back toward her the way he sometimes did on his proud days. "Get that thing off my table before someone thinks we serve charity cases here." Vanessa Caldwell said it loud enough for the whole gym to hear. She was standing by the dessert table at Redwood Elementary's fall fundraiser night, her manicured hand pointing at a brown paper bag sitting near the cupcakes. The bag belonged to a 10-year-old girl named Aaliyah Carter. Inside, it was a turkey sandwich, a small apple, and a napkin folded the way her mother always folded it, in a neat triangle, like a little roof over the food. Aaliyah did not move fast. She reached over, picked up her bag, and held it against her chest like it was something worth protecting. Because it was. That sandwich was supposed to be her lunch for tomorrow. Her mother had made it that morning before her shift started at 4:30. The gym was full. Round tables covered in white cloth. A banner that said Redwood Elementary Proud and Strong hanging crooked over the stage. Parents in nice sweaters holding plastic cups of lemonade. Kids running between the tables while a man in a blazer tried to auction off a gift basket nobody wanted. Vanessa Caldwell was not finished. "I mean it," she said, turning to the two women beside her so they could hear every word. "This is a $500 a plate event. We are trying to raise money for new science equipment. And we've got kids bringing lunch bags to a formal function like it's the cafeteria." She laughed. It was not a real laugh. It was the kind of laugh that people use as a weapon. One of the women beside her, a teacher named Carol Higgins, looked down at her shoes. She had been teaching 3rd grade at Redwood for 11 years. She needed this job. Her husband had been out of work for 5 months. She opened her mouth for half a second like she might say something, and then she closed it again and looked away. The other woman, Denise Patterson, a school board member's wife, just smiled, a small, tight smile, and said nothing at all. She told herself later that she did not fully understand what was happening. She told herself that a lot of things that night. Aaliyah Carter was 10 years old. She was wearing a blue dress that used to belong to her cousin, taken in at the waist with 3 careful stitches her mother had done herself the night before, sitting at the kitchen table under a lamp with a bad bulb. Her shoes were white sneakers that had been washed so many times the laces had gone gray. She had one small gold cross on a thin chain around her neck. It had belonged to her grandmother. Her mother, Denise Carter, was standing 3 feet away, wearing her one good dress, the same green one she wore to every important thing in her life for the last 6 years. Denise cleaned houses for a living, 6 houses a week, sometimes 7. She had come straight from the Whitfield house that evening, still smelling faintly of lemon cleaner, because she did not want to miss her daughter's school event, even for one night. Vanessa Caldwell looked at Denise now. She looked her up and down, slow, the way you look at something you've already decided is beneath you. "And you're the mother, I take it," Vanessa said. "The one who cleans for the Whitfields?" "Yes, ma'am," Denise said quietly. "Well?" Vanessa smiled with just her mouth. "That explains the dress." A few people near the dessert table laughed. Not everyone, but enough. The sound moved across the gym floor like a small wave, and then it died, and the room went quiet, the way a room goes quiet right before something bad keeps happening and nobody stops it. Aaliyah did not cry. She did not shout. She held her lunch bag a little tighter and looked at the floor, at the shine of the gym varnish under the lights, at her own gray shoelaces. She thought about her grandmother. Her grandmother used to say, whenever life got mean, "Baby, you don't have to be loud to be strong. Water doesn't shout when it wears down a stone. It just keeps showing up." Aaliyah held that sentence the way some people hold a hand. She stood up a little straighter. None of them in that gym had any idea that in less than 1 hour, a black government sedan would pull up outside a small rented house 4 miles away, and 2 United States Army officers in dress uniform would knock on that door for a reason nobody in this room could have guessed. But that was still ahead. Right now, there was just the gym and the silence and a 10-year-old girl standing very still while a grown woman made fun of her lunch in front of 40 people. Vanessa was not finished. She never was finished the first time. "You know," she said, raising her voice so the folks near the stage could hear too, "I think it's actually kind of sweet in a sad way. Bringing your own food so you don't have to buy a ticket you can't afford. That takes nerve. Mom packed that for me," Aaliyah said. Quiet, steady, the only thing she said the whole time. "I'm sure she did." Vanessa's smile did not move. Then something cracked. Not a person. A folding table leg, the cheap kind the school rented every year, buckling under the weight of a punch bowl someone had set down too hard while backing away from the scene. Red punch spilled across the white tablecloth in a shape like a small flood. A few people jumped back. Someone said, "Oh no," too loudly. The room's attention scattered for half a second, and in that half a second, the school principal, a tired man named Gregory Owens, who had been watching from near the stage and doing absolutely nothing about it, walked over and said the only thing he was willing to say. "Denise, maybe it's best if you and Aaliyah head on home. Long night for everybody." Not a word to Vanessa. Not one word. Denise nodded. She took her daughter's hand. They walked past the dessert table, past the science project posters taped to the wall, past 40 pairs of eyes that either looked away or did not look away at all, and out through the double doors into the cool October night. Aaliyah did not cry until they reached the car. And even then, it was only 2 tears, fast, wiped away with the back of her hand before her mother could see. She did not want her mother carrying one more heavy thing tonight. Her mother already carried enough. They drove home in silence for a while. The radio was off. Denise gripped the wheel a little tighter than usual. "You okay, baby?" she finally asked. "I'm okay," Aaliyah said. And she meant it. Mostly, the way a person can mean something and still feel it sitting heavy in their chest at the same time. Have you ever had someone make you feel small in front of a whole room and you had to just stand there and take it because saying something back would only make it worse? If that has ever happened to you, put it in the comments and tell me where you're watching from tonight. And if you haven't hit subscribe to Black Scars yet, now's the time, because this story is about to take a turn nobody in that gym could see coming. To understand why Aaliyah Carter could stand in that gym and not fall apart, you have to go back 4 years to a bus stop bench outside Lincoln Avenue Elementary on a Tuesday afternoon in September when she was 6 years old. Denise Carter had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in South Memphis, raised by her own mother, Ruthie Carter, who cleaned office buildings downtown for 31 years without missing more than 4 days of work total. Ruthie used to tell Denise, "A job is a job, baby. Do it clean, do it proud, and don't you ever let another person's rudeness become your shame." Ruthie died when Denise was 22, 3 years before Aaliyah was born, but her voice never left the house. Denise repeated it to her own daughter, almost word for word, sitting on the edge of a twin bed most nights, the same bed Aaliyah slept in now. Denise's husband, Marcus Carter, had been a warehouse supervisor at a shipping company in Atlanta. He died in a car accident on Interstate 285 when Aaliyah was 3 years old, hit by a driver who ran a red light at 11:14 at night. The insurance settlement came to $14,000 after the lawyer's fees. It lasted less than 8 months once the funeral, the rent, and the hospital bills were paid. After that, it was just Denise and Aaliyah in a rented 2-bedroom house on Faro Street, paying $640 a month, working every job she could find that would let her be home by the time Aaliyah got off the school bus. By the time Aaliyah started kindergarten, Denise was cleaning 6 houses a week for a company called Bright Homes Cleaning Service, earning $11 an hour, 22 hours a week guaranteed, more if a client called for an extra day. It was never quite enough. Some months she skipped her own lunch 3 days out of 5 so there would be enough left for groceries and the light bill. She never once let Aaliyah go without. Aaliyah started walking home from the Lincoln Avenue bus stop with an older neighbor girl named Destiny Owusu, 4 blocks, past a laundromat, past a church with a sign that changed its message every Sunday, and past a bench outside a boarded-up hardware store where an old man sat almost every single day. His name was Colonel Franklin Daly. Everybody on the block just called him Old Man Daly. He was 78 years old the year Aaliyah met him. He wore the same faded green army jacket no matter the weather, and he sat on that bench from around 2 in the afternoon until it got dark, sometimes talking to no one, sometimes just watching the street. Some of the neighborhood kids made fun of him. Some crossed the street to avoid him. Nobody really knew his story. What they knew was that he seemed to have nothing and nowhere else to be. The first time Aaliyah stopped to talk to him, it was because her sandwich bag had torn and half her lunch had spilled on the sidewalk in front of his bench. She was 6 years old. She knelt down, gathered up what she could save, and when she stood up, the old man was looking at her with an expression she didn't understand yet. "You didn't eat much of that, did you?" he said. "It wasn't really a question." "I ate the apple already," Aaliyah said. "This is the rest. Looks like a sad little sandwich now." Aaliyah looked at the smushed sandwich in her hand, and then, without really thinking about it the way 6-year-olds don't always think things through, she held half of it out to him. "You want some?" He stared at her for a long moment. He had not been offered anything by a stranger in longer than he could easily remember. His hand, when it reached out, was shaking a little. He took the half sandwich like it was something fragile. "Thank you," he said. His voice cracked in the middle of the 2 words. That was the beginning. It became a habit, then a rule Aaliyah made for herself without ever saying it out loud. Every school day, she saved something from her lunch. Half a sandwich most days. Sometimes the whole thing if she'd already eaten a big breakfast. A cookie. An orange. Whatever she had, she split it. And on the walk home, she sat with Old Man Daly on that bench for exactly as long as her mother allowed before she had to be home, and she gave him whatever she'd saved. He started telling her things. Not all at once. Not even most of it made sense to a little girl at first. He told her he used to be a soldier, a long time ago, in a war most kids her age had never heard the name of. He told her about a daughter he used to have, and how they stopped speaking many years back over something so small he could barely remember what started it, only that neither one of them had ever taken the first step to fix it, and now she had passed away 2 years before he ever got the chance. He told her he had a wife once, too, named Eleanor, who died of cancer in 2009, and that some nights he still set 2 cups down on the table before he remembered. He never once asked Aaliyah for money. He never once asked for more than what she offered. He just asked her, almost every day, how school was going, and he listened like her answer actually mattered, which by that point in his life, not many people made him feel like it did. By the time Aaliyah was 10, this had been going on for 4 straight years. 4 years of a 10-year-old girl giving away part of her own lunch, rain or cold or heat, to an old man on a bench that most of the neighborhood had learned to walk past without seeing. What none of them knew, not Denise, not the neighbors, not Vanessa Caldwell standing in that gym with her manicured finger pointed at a paper lunch bag, was that Colonel Franklin Daly had served 26 years in the United States Army. He had 2 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star from a rescue mission in 1971 that saved 11 men in his unit, and a full military pension that he had, for reasons only he understood at the time, stopped collecting properly for almost a decade after his wife died, letting it pile up untouched in an account he barely looked at because looking at it meant looking at everything he'd lost along with it. He also kept a journal. Every single day, in a spiral notebook he bought for $1.49 at a dollar store on Bellevue Road, he wrote down what happened. And for the last 4 years, one name appeared in that journal more than any other single word. Aaliyah. He wrote about the day she gave him half a peanut butter sandwich in the rain and stood there getting soaked because she wouldn't leave until he finished eating. He wrote about the day she was 8 and told him she wanted to be a nurse because nurses fix people's outsides and insides at the same time. He wrote, on a page dated just 6 weeks before the fundraiser, That child has given me more in 4 years on a bus stop bench than most people gave me in 26 years of service. I do not know how to repay a debt like that, but I am going to try." What Aaliyah never knew, and what none of them in that gym that night could have guessed, was that 6 days before the fundraiser, Colonel Franklin Daly had walked into the office of a lawyer named Gerald Whitfield on Cassell Road. A lawyer, it happened, who was the husband of a woman Denise cleaned house for twice a week, though neither Colonel Daly nor Gerald Whitfield knew that connection yet, and signed papers that changed everything. And 2 days after that, on a Thursday morning, sitting alone on his bench in the cold, Colonel Franklin Daly closed his eyes and did not open them again. The coroner said his heart simply stopped sometime around 11 in the morning. He was found by a delivery driver a little after noon. He was 78 years old, and according to every record on file, he had no living relatives, no next of kin, no one listed to call, except for one name written on a single line of a legal document sitting in a lawyer's file cabinet 4 miles away. The papers Colonel Daly signed that Tuesday were simple on the surface and enormous underneath. He had established what is called a beneficiary trust, funded with 2 things: his full military pension back pay, which had quietly built up to just over $161,000 over the years he'd barely touched it, and the proceeds from the sale of a small piece of land he had inherited from his own father back in 1988 in rural Georgia, land he had never once visited but had also never sold, worth, once the paperwork went through, another $94,000. Total value of the trust, $255,000. Named beneficiary, Aaliyah Renee Carter, to be held until her 18th birthday, released in stages for education, with Denise Carter named as trustee. But money was not the only thing in that file. Gerald Whitfield, the lawyer, had asked Colonel Daly a simple question that Tuesday afternoon. "Colonel, can I ask why? You barely know this family, from what you've told me." And Colonel Daly had answered him with something Gerald wrote down almost word for word in his private notes, because it struck him hard enough that he didn't want to forget it. "4 years ago, I was a man nobody bothered to see. I sat on a bench, and the world walked past me like I was part of the sidewalk. A 6-year-old girl looked at me and saw a person who was hungry, and she fed me, not because anybody told her to, and not because she had extra. She fed me because she had a heart big enough to notice somebody the rest of the world had stopped noticing. That is rarer than money. That is rarer than almost anything I've seen in my whole life, including the 26 years I spent in uniform. I have no children left who speak to me. I have no wife left to come home to. What I have is a debt to a little girl who reminded an old, broken-down man that he still mattered. I intend to pay that debt in full." There was one more thing in the file. A letter, sealed, addressed simply to Aaliyah, to be opened only after his passing. And there was one more piece of paperwork that mattered more than anyone realized that night in the gym. Because Colonel Franklin Daly, in his 26 years of service, had also been present, decades earlier, at a very different kind of hearing. One where he had personally written a report about a young supply officer who had been caught falsifying expense records for a base charity fund, skimming money meant for the families of deployed soldiers. That young officer's name, at the time, had been Vanessa Caldwell. She was 24 years old then, discharged quietly, records sealed to protect the reputation of the unit, allowed to walk away with no criminal charge as long as she repaid what she'd taken and never wore the uniform again. Colonel Daly was the only officer who still had a copy of the full report, tucked inside a manila folder inside a filing box that had sat, untouched, at the bottom of his closet for almost 30 years, right up until the week before he died, when he had pulled it out and mailed a copy of it to Gerald Whitfield's office along with instructions on when and how it should be used, should it ever become necessary, and only if it becomes necessary, because a person deserves the chance to be better than their worst day, but not the right to keep hurting others while hiding from it. He had recognized her the moment Denise mentioned, months earlier on the bench, the name of the woman who was making things hard on some of the other cleaning staff at the school events. He never told Aaliyah why the name mattered. He just quietly made sure that if it ever needed to come out, it could. Two women had watched Vanessa Caldwell humiliate someone that night and said nothing. Carol Higgins, the third-grade teacher, went home and could not sleep. She lay in bed next to her husband and stared at the ceiling and thought about 11 years of watching Vanessa Caldwell say things at school events that made other parents flinch, and 11 years of staying quiet because Vanessa's husband sat on the school board that approved teacher contracts. Carol thought about the look on Aaliyah's face when she picked up that lunch bag. She thought about it for a long time. Denise Patterson, the school board member's wife, went home and told herself the same thing she always told herself. That it wasn't her business. That she barely knew the girl. That speaking up would only make things awkward for everyone at the next fundraiser. She told herself this while her own daughter, watching from across the room, quietly decided that her mother was the kind of woman who stayed silent, and quietly decided she did not want to grow up to be that kind of woman herself. At 8:52 that same night, a black government sedan pulled up outside the small rented house on Faro Street. Aaliyah was sitting on the porch steps in her jacket, still in her blue dress, waiting for the night air to cool the sting out of her chest. Denise was inside, hanging up the green dress so it wouldn't wrinkle. Two men stepped out of the car. Both wore the formal dress uniform of the United States Army. One was a major named Gregory Simmons. The other was a sergeant first class named Diane Okafor, who had served under Colonel Daly's mentorship program for junior officers 15 years earlier and had personally asked to be part of this visit. "Ma'am," Major Simmons said, when Denise opened the door, "are you Denise Carter?" Denise's stomach dropped the way it does for anyone who has ever opened a door to a uniform at night and thought immediately of every terrible thing it could mean. "Yes," she said, her voice thin. "Is this about?" "Ma'am, this isn't the kind of news you might be bracing for," the major said gently, reading her face. "May we come in?" "This concerns a man named Colonel Franklin Daly." Something in Aaliyah's chest went very still and very cold at once. They sat in the small living room. Aaliyah sat pressed against her mother's side on the old couch, and Sergeant Okafor knelt down in front of her, at her eye level, the way you speak to someone whose news deserves respect no matter how young they are. "Sweetheart," she said, "I need to tell you that Colonel Daly passed away 2 days ago. His heart. It was quick, and I'm told it was peaceful." Aaliyah did not make a sound at first. Her eyes filled, slow, and one tear slid straight down without her wiping it away this time. She did not need to protect anyone from seeing this one. "But," Sergeant Okafor continued, softer, "before he passed, he made sure some things were taken care of, and he asked us, specifically, to be the ones who came and told you, because he wanted it done with respect. He also left you this." She handed Aaliyah a sealed envelope with her name written on the front in slow, careful handwriting that had clearly cost an old man some effort. Denise's hands were shaking as Major Simmons explained the rest. The trust, the amount, the terms, the fact that a man neither she nor her daughter had ever fully understood had quietly built the largest act of trust either of them had ever received, out of nothing but 4 years of half sandwiches on a bench. Aaliyah opened the letter with careful fingers, the way you open something you already know is going to matter for the rest of your life. It said, "Dear Aaliyah, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I am sorry I did not get to say goodbye the way I wanted to. You gave an old man his dignity back on a bench outside a hardware store, 4 years running, and you never once asked for a thing in return. I want you to know your kindness was never invisible. I wrote it all down. Every single day of it mattered to me more than you will ever fully know. Use what I've left behind to become whoever you want to become. Be a nurse if you still want to be a nurse. Fix people's outsides and insides at the same time, like you told me once. And when you're grown and someone treats you small the way the world sometimes tries to treat good people small, remember this. The people who notice the ones everyone else walks past are the strongest people alive." You were the strongest person on that bus stop bench every single time, even though you were the smallest one sitting on it. Thank you for feeding me when the world had stopped seeing me. Yours, always, Colonel Franklin Daly. Denise read it over her daughter's shoulder and had to press her hand against her mouth. Have you ever done something kind for someone and never once expected anything back, only to find out years later that it mattered more than you could have possibly imagined? Tell me about it in the comments, because stories like that deserve to be heard. The next 2 weeks moved fast in a way that felt slow to live through. Colonel Daly's funeral was held with full military honors at a national cemetery outside the city, arranged and paid for by the Army once his service record was confirmed. Word had spread, the way it does, that a decorated war hero who many believed had died with no family at all had, in fact, left everything he had to a 10-year-old girl and her mother. A local news reporter named Patricia Yoon picked up the story after a neighbor mentioned it, and within 4 days it had run on 2 local stations. At the funeral, 23 uniformed soldiers stood in formation. A flag was folded 13 times, tight and exact, and placed into Aaliyah's hands by Sergeant Okafor herself, because that had been the colonel's specific request, written down in his own instructions. Aaliyah held that folded flag against her chest the exact same way she had held her lunch bag 2 weeks earlier in the school gym, except this time, nobody in the crowd was laughing. Carol Higgins came to the funeral. She stood near the back, alone, and afterward she walked up to Denise, and for the first time in 11 years of knowing about things and saying nothing, she said something. "I should have said something that night," Carol said. Her voice shook. "In the gym. I've thought about it every day since. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Not from me." Denise looked at her for a long moment, and then nodded, because forgiveness, when it's offered honestly, is something Denise's own mother had taught her never to withhold from someone who is finally telling the truth. The story of the trust reached the school board within days, mostly because Gerald Whitfield's office had to formally notify certain institutions as part of settling the estate, and paperwork like that does not stay quiet in a town this size. It reached Vanessa Caldwell's husband, a board member named Richard Caldwell, who was already fielding uncomfortable questions from other parents about what exactly his wife had said at the fundraiser, since 3 separate people had described it, almost word for word, to the reporter covering the colonel's story for a follow-up piece about the family the colonel had left everything to. And then, quietly, a second story surfaced. Gerald Whitfield, following the exact instructions the colonel had left him, delivered a sealed copy of the old military report to the Department of the Army's Inspector General's office and, separately, to the school board's ethics committee, since Vanessa Caldwell had, unrelated to her military past, been serving as an unpaid financial volunteer for the very fundraiser account she had mocked Aaliyah in front of that night. It turned out Vanessa Caldwell had been doing more than mocking a little girl's lunch. For the past 3 years, small amounts had been quietly moving out of the Redwood Elementary fundraiser account into a personal account under her maiden name. $400 here, $600 there, never enough at once to draw a hard look. Exactly the kind of pattern a woman who had once been caught doing something similar in the Army would know how to keep small and slow. The school board opened a formal review. Vanessa Caldwell resigned from her volunteer position within a week before the review even finished, which most people in town understood for exactly what it was. Her husband did not resign from anything, but he stopped showing up to fundraisers with her on his arm the way he used to. Their daughter, a 7th grader named Emily, stopped telling classmates her mother's name led the school's charity events, because by spring, that name did not open doors anymore. It closed them. The confrontation itself happened in a school board meeting 6 weeks after the fundraiser, open to the public, packed tighter than any meeting anyone could remember. Vanessa sat at the front, her lawyer beside her, her confidence from that gym completely gone. Her voice, when she finally spoke, had none of the sharp edge it carried that night by the dessert table. "I want to say," she began, "that I never meant." "You said what you meant," said a school board attorney reviewing the case, a woman named Barbara Reese, flatly. "You said it in front of 40 witnesses, and 3 of them wrote it down that same night because they couldn't stop thinking about it." Vanessa's explanations came out slow, then faster, then desperate, the way a person talks when they can feel the ground actually leaving from under them for the first time in years. She talked about stress. She talked about how the fund was basically hers to manage. She talked about how she never meant it personally toward Aaliyah, only for the room to remind her, gently but firmly, that the girl standing there that night had heard every word personally, whether it was meant that way or not. The board voted 5-2 to bar her permanently from any volunteer or financial role at any Redwood Elementary event. The misappropriated funds, just over $11,000 total across 3 years, were referred to the county for restitution proceedings. She was not arrested. She was not sent anywhere dramatic. She simply lost, piece by piece, in front of the same kind of room that had once laughed along with her, every single thing she had built her image on. That is often how it goes. Not with handcuffs. Just with the truth, finally standing up in a room, in front of people who had once been too afraid to make it stand up themselves. Spring came, and with it, real changes, the kind that outlast a single news cycle. Denise used a portion of the released trust funds, following the exact stage terms Colonel Daly had set up, to move Aaliyah and herself into a slightly bigger rented house 4 streets over, one with a small yard and a working furnace that didn't rattle all winter. She kept cleaning houses, though now only 3 days a week instead of 6, because she had also enrolled in night classes at a community college to finish the medical billing certificate she had started and dropped 17 years earlier, before Marcus, before Aaliyah, back when life had different plans that got interrupted. The Whitfield family, whose house Denise still cleaned twice a month out of a friendship that had grown slowly and honestly over the years, helped set up something new at Redwood Elementary. The Colonel Franklin Daly Kindness Scholarship, a fund that provided school supplies, warm coats, and a hot lunch account for any student at Redwood whose family needed it. No questions asked, no announcements made in front of the whole school. Just quiet help, the way the Colonel would have wanted it. Carol Higgins became the first teacher to volunteer overseeing the fund's distribution, and she made sure of one thing personally, that no child receiving it would ever be pointed out, named, or mocked in front of a room, not while she had a voice to use. Denise Patterson, the school board member's wife who had stayed silent that night, did not get the chance to fully undo what her silence had allowed. Some things you can only partly repair. But the following year, when a different mother at a different event made a comment about another child's secondhand shoes, Denise Patterson was the first person in the room to speak up, loud and clear, in front of everyone, and she did not stop until the woman apologized. Her own daughter, watching from across the room, finally saw her mother become the kind of woman she'd hoped she could grow up to be. Aaliyah Carter turned 11 that spring. She kept the folded flag on a shelf in her room, next to a spiral notebook of her own that she started keeping, the first page reading simply, "Started this because Colonel Daly kept one, and I want to remember things too." She still says, sometimes, that the sandwich she gave away on that bus stop bench when she was 6 years old is the most important thing she ever did with her life. More important, she says, than anything that came after it, including the money, including the flag, including her name being read out loud at a school board meeting. "I didn't do it to get anything," she told the local reporter, Patricia Yoon, when asked about it months later. "I did it because he looked hungry, and I had a sandwich. That's all it was at first. That's all it was at first. And it turned into everything." So here's my question for you tonight. Has there ever been someone in your life that everyone else walked past? Someone easy to ignore, someone the world stopped noticing. And you were the one person who stopped and saw them anyway? Tell me who they were in the comments below. I want to hear it. And if this story moved you even a little, I want you to think about somebody in your own life right now who needs to hear it. Maybe it's someone who's been made to feel small in front of a room and never got to see the room turn around. Maybe it's someone who's been quiet too long and needs a reminder that speaking up still matters. Send it to them. Not for views. Because stories like this one only mean something if they actually change how we treat the next person we walk past on a bench, in a hallway, or in a gym full of people who could choose to stay silent or choose not to. Kindness is never wasted, even when it looks small, even when nobody's watching, even when it's just half a sandwich handed to an old man on a bench who the rest of the world forgot to see. This has been Black Scars. Maybe it's someone who's been quiet too long and needs a reminder that speaking up still matters. Send it to them, not for views. Because stories like this one only mean something if they actually change how we treat the next person we walk past on a bench, in a hallway, or in a gym full of people who could choose to stay silent or choose not to. Kindness is never wasted, even when it looks small, even when nobody's watching, even when it's just half a sandwich handed to an old man on a bench who the rest of the world forgot to see. This has been Black Scars.